Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another live presentation of Sumer Daily. Today, I am joined by Lindsay Rhodes, the host of the SumerSports Show. Lindsay, how was your Thanksgiving?
It was so good. It was so good. It's nice to actually have a day off to just take in the games without like having to rush off. And I mean, you're never really off if there's football on, right? Like taking notes and watching from a work standpoint. But it was nice to have just a day.
Yeah, it was fantastic. Unfortunately, in terms of, the deep diving and sweating out the football, it was not
Yeah.
fantastic because Tulane was playing on Thanksgiving for me and obviously all the rivalry games after that. But there was some fantastic football this weekend, namely this game that we just watched, Lindsay, in the snow between the Bills and the 49ers. What were your main kind of takeaways from this game?
Yeah, it was like half fantastic. It was fantastic if you're a Bills fan. It was not so fantastic if you're a Niners fan. That was rough to watch from a Niners standpoint. I'm kind of at the point where it's like it's just a mash unit. They're like a team that's being held together with duct tape and they just feel like they're ready to fall off the hinges. And when CMC left and then Fred Warner left, and it just feels like I was like, can we just call this one? Like throw in some backups and be like, not today. It's not today. So it's a bummer watching the Niners just not have all of their pieces healthy because what they might be able to do. I know we're not getting a chance to see that with Trent Williams already shelved and Nick
Right.
Bosa not on the field and Purdy coming off an injury and Ayuk not there. And it's like, it's one thing after another, which is disappointing to see for them.
Right. And, I wonder how much the weather had to do with all this because obviously it's like not ideal, but we know those cold weather teams in particular. We saw it on Thursday with the Packers. We've literally heard it like the curtain pulled back by guys like Ernie Adams that were in the Patriots organization back in the day of how they approach these cold weather games. Lindsay, this is an argument I get into with Sean Syed of the Stats and Scheme podcast all the time. Are you pro these snow games? Do you think that like you're able to take away something long term from them? Or do you think they just kind of like muddle the game up a little bit and you kind of have to throw them away, especially after a game like this where the Bills, absolutely
Yeah.
blew out a San Francisco team that doesn't have to see those conditions all the time?
Yeah, it's probably a little bit of both. I think they can both be true at the same time. I think it's obvious that it's an advantage for the Bills and the fact that the Bills can continue to play through that. I mean, there were only 17 pass attempts for Josh Allen. This isn't the
Right.
way that they want to run their offense, but the fact that they can play in these conditions and can do so successfully, obviously the build is part of that. So I think it's a little bit of both, right? Like, I mean, certainly for the Dolphins, it's like for whatever reason, and I know it was just beat into the ground when the Dolphins were playing the Packers. Like, hey, did you know that they're not good in the cold? And I know everyone was sick of hearing that during the broadcast, but obviously there's something going on there
Right.
for at least a handful of important players because it's a consistent pattern. And I thought going into last year's game, they made a lot of it before, it was the Dolphins Bills game. And I was like, a lot of these guys grew up in cold weather and played in cold weather in college. It's not like none of them have played football prior to, joining the team in Miami, but then they turned around and they just got smoked and didn't look anything like themselves. So for Tua, at least, I mean, there are some people who clearly have a problem handling these circumstances, and I think that there are some teams that are probably built. And I don't know if it's what they do during the season to get ready. I don't know if they're building a team that is specifically with their own home field advantage conditions in mind. But I think there's certainly they're messy games, they're sloppy
Right.
games, and so in that sense, no, we're not getting a chance to see, like in the case of tonight, we weren't seeing the Niners best foot that they had to put forward. If it were, if the conditions were great and there was no weather involved, we would have seen a much better 49ers team. But they have a lot going on right now, and I think that it's a benefit for the Bills. Where do you come down on this?
I particularly in the AFC, it's so weird how it falls because all of the great AFC quarterbacks right now are all at least in the, Northeast or Midwest in outdoor stadiums that can get pretty hectic. So you think about Lamar, You saw the equipment guys literally sprinting on the field, like covering him and his teammates in jackets immediately today, even though it wasn't, that crazy of a condition in Baltimore. Obviously the Bills, it gets nuts. And then Arrowhead also gets super cold. And we've seen Mahomes play through that and play that to his advantage, much like Josh Allen did today. I think it's less of an issue in the NFC. That being said, you still have to go through Lambeau. It's just like, it's so interesting. You got your LA Dodgers hat on. It's almost like the short porch over there and right for Aaron Judge to a certain degree. And Josh Allen is the guy, guy who takes advantage of this. I was commenting earlier, it's hilarious how in the game, it's almost like Josh Allen is immediate, they're just not going to rush me. I'm going to throw it around. And we saw that even going back to his early days when he would play I remember in particular, there was a Patriots game where Bill Belichick was committed to winning the game by not throwing a pass. I think it was Mac Jones' rookie year, and Josh Allen was just slinging it. And we kind of saw that again today. He ends with 2 touchdowns passing. He was kind of running all over the place, really taking advantage of the fact that it seemed like he was not going to get a consistent pass rush just due to the elements. Mm-hmm. And he uniquely takes advantage of that. I think you kind of see Mahomes do that to a certain degree, but Allen in particular has the build to do that. So I think it just matters more in the AFC, and it's always going to matter because those AFC North teams are always, in the mix. We saw the Steelers and the Browns go at it in a similar fashion here. The Steelers get the win today, put up a ton of points. That's going to be in the mix. So I think when you're looking at the AFC in particular, where you don't have the indoor stadiums that the Lions have and the Vikings have and the Falcons have, and you don't have to go to Tampa for a game or something like that, it makes a lot more difference. And so I'm actually taking away from this that perhaps we can trust the Bills a little bit more if they have to go into Pittsburgh or if they have to go into Arrowhead than we would in previous years, per se.
Well, in general, I think that you ideally want a team that can win a sloppy game.
Exactly.
You want them to be able to compete if the game's a little bit finesse and you're throwing it all around the yard. And I think that the Bills fit that bill, but you also want to be able to just boil it down and be like, hey, everything fell apart. Can we still make something happen here? That's your best case scenario. And certainly the Bills have that. I wonder to a degree if, since we're talking about the weather conditions and, people, the actual roster being okay playing in cold weather doesn't make sense to me, just for the reason that I said. People are moving all over the place. And so, I wonder if it isn't more in the equipment staff and the people who are rooted in that market. They really understand the footwear that you need, so you're not sliding around. They know exactly how much cold weather gear, what to put them in, that kind of stuff to maximize the performance ability, I suppose, in these types of conditions. I wonder how much there is, because you did see, obviously footing is an issue in the snow. There are certain things that pop up. I mean, in terms of sloppy games, I think the worst case scenario is the wind, right? You can play through the snow for the most part. Although I've talked to a bunch of different former wide receivers in particular who talk about the fact that it feels like your hands are shattering. When you catch a ball in the cold, when it's really, really cold, it actually physically hurts to catch the ball. So there's that to keep in mind. It's obviously complicated, but the wind is the one that that game. Wasn't it Bills Patriots? I'm so bad with NFL history. The second a game happens, I flush it out of my brain. So I'm not the person to ask about everything that's happened in years past. But that it wasn't a 6-3 game, and it was Bills Patriots, and it was just so gross, and nobody threw the ball at all, and that was primarily wind. So I guess that's the one that really takes you out of it the most. And in situations like tonight's game, you just see the teams that are built to play in those conditions. And like you said, a lot of them are on the East or in the North.
Right. True Southern boy here. Obviously played football in New Orleans. I would much rather play in the 90, 100 degree weather. We went up to Boise and played a Nevada team at the time that had Romeo Dobbs, Carson Strong, who wasn't in the league at the time, was very highly rated on the consensus big board, Cole Turner, who's now playing for the Commanders, and they just ran us out the building because we were just not prepared. And to your point, it literally felt when I was on the field, like if I got hit, it was physically painful in a way that it just isn't when, the blood's flowing, the adrenaline's flowing, even if it's overheating. Another cold game I really played in was in Philly. In that building, like Lincoln Financial, where we played Temple at the time, the wind does whip, like you can hear it. And it was just so gnarly. And speaking of, Philly, the big discussion coming out of the 4 p.m. game is Saquon going to win MVP? And then Josh Allen comes up and has 2 touchdowns passing, a touchdown rushing, and a touchdown officially labeled as receiving. Learn that the hard way by doing the wonderful stats that you can check out at SumerSports.com. Had to go through all the league rules about what a receiving touchdown technically is when Amari Cooper catches the ball and laterals it to Josh Allen. But nonetheless, now it's this crazy MVP conversation that seems like it has Josh Allen at the top, in my view, and Saquon Barkley just underneath him, despite that, he may set the rushing record at this point.
So we're just eliminating Lamar?
It's tough. I mean, this is now 2 games that Lamar has had against, if not primo opponents in terms of the Steelers, at least like the guys that you have to beat to win a title.
Yeah.
He looked good today. Like it looked like he was doing what he needed to do today. They just could not get it all together against a very good defense. But it's 2 great defense that he's now struggled against. I just think the case is not as good as Josh Allen's at this point in terms of like the top quarterback in the league, which I think like it's going to be the top quarterback versus Saquon if he keeps playing like that. Does that make sense to you, Lindsay?
Yeah, I think some people will probably vote for Saquon. We've had this conversation. I can't bring myself to vote for a running back for this award. And I know that there are people that are just going to think that that's a stupid line in the sand. I just have a hard time feeling like really tearing it down to its bare bones to say, like, if you lifted Saquon Barkley off of the Eagles, do they fall apart? He's not the piece that makes them go. He is the piece that puts them over the top, maybe. He's the piece that's like a luxury piece that really, really makes them a tougher out in the postseason and maybe more likely to win the Super Bowl. But I still think that they're in the hunt, even if it was a running back that they had drafted and just plugged in. So I have a really hard time doing that over a quarterback, because if you take Josh Allen, I mean, these are extreme quarterbacks. If you take Josh Allen off the Bills, like, who are they? What is that team? There's no, I mean, if you're having a value conversation, and I know that some people are like, he's the best player in the league, or is it value? And do we get too hung up on the value part of MVP? But if value is in the equation, if that's something we're supposed to keep in mind, I just have a really hard time not giving it to a quarterback when you have very, very good quarterbacks that are playing at the top of their game. Like Josh and Lamar, I think, are both in this conversation. And Josh is having as good of a season as he's had in a long time. And we had all the turnover worthy, like the interceptions, and we had to wade through that conversation last year. Well, they're not there this year. Like the turnover worthy plays are
yeah.
So it's not happening for him this year. That part of it is cleaned up. And you took away Stephon Diggs. So, I mean, the wide receiver room that he's working with here, we're throwing touchdown passes to Mac Hollins. It's how many quarterbacks could get plopped onto that roster and be like, they're going to have the success that the Bills are having. I just think that we don't give them enough credit for what they're bringing. Or, I mean, I'm sure some people would argue that we give them too much credit, and that's why we need to insert Saquon Barkley into the conversation. But I just think that those are the pieces that make the team go. And so I would have a very hard time voting for Saquon Barkley.
Yeah, I think the case that is starting to build for Saquon, if you do want to make the case, I 100% agree with your analysis, Lindsay, is that it's starting to look like Jalen Hurts is not having one of those fantastic years. He was 50th percentile EPA per play today. Again, we know how much, expected points added he gets from those tush pushes, brotherly shoves, whatever you want to call them, just because that's putting yards in context. And those are like big, huge plays in the context of a game. But is that really him? Is that the offensive line? And then also looking at the passing game, 30th percentile in terms of EPA per pass today. Just not ideal. And they're case to win on offense, and their offense has been very, very good all year and very dominant all year, is let's
Run.
get Saquon behind that offensive line. Now,
But then
that
the point you just
exactly.
made about Jalen Hurts in the offensive line literally goes to Saquon Barkley also with the offensive
Precisely.
line. Like he's 100% benefiting from the strength of that offensive line.
Precisely.
Like what would he look like if the yards before contact was, you know, a smaller number?
Exactly.
What does he look like if they're right on top of him? I just think that it's an interesting conversation. And I think I'm glad that the running backs who are specifically the elite running backs or have been in years past, that we weren't really sure what this was going to look like this year. I'm glad that they're having the years that they're having, because I just think it's a very interesting conversation and one that's not fully flushed out. And so as we continue to gather data and we continue to figure out ways to really evaluate running backs, like I think that we've gotten really good and made massive strides in the last 5 years in terms of how to pull people out of offenses and then evaluate their contribution outside of volume stats or things that, like for so long, you're just like going, oh, this quarterback has X number of interceptions and X number of touchdowns and X number of yards. And, you're not necessarily looking at when you're talking about, passing yards, you're not looking at passing attempts and yards per play. Like nobody even went to that step. And so to be able to pull people out of the offensive environment and try and find ways to evaluate their play that are effective, I think that the running back is really the biggest mystery to us in our space, in terms of how to evaluate whether or not somebody is good absent their environment. And so I'm glad that this is happening so we can continue to have the conversation. I think that all three of them are examples in their last situations about how they are not it's a trucks versus trailers conversation. And I'm not saying that they're all trailers, but by the nature of their position, I think that they are to a degree. You have to have, like, Sam Darnold is having a great year, relative to the rest of his career. And my argument for him over the years has always been, he's always been in a bad situation. So the only thing that I feel comfortable saying, I 100% know this, is that he is not one of the elite quarterbacks who can overcome a bad situation and pull the team along with him. That's what I learned about him in the first X number of years of his career. Don't know if he's somebody that you can't win with if the situation is good. And I think we're finding out this year that he is somebody that can win if the pieces around him are good, if the environment is good. And so I just think that running backs almost all fit the bill, like fit that description. Like you need that. Are there any running backs? And this is actually, are there any that you can think of where you're like, man, that guy is the reason that they're winning. The team around him is bad, but look at that guy go, and he's pulling them to some wins.
Right. I think the only running back you can make that argument for in recent history would be Christian McCaffrey. And we see him go out in this game, and it really brings up these questions about, where do the 49ers go from here? I think McCaffrey probably is a product of having Trent Williams and a lot of talent at the tight end position and the wide receiver position. But for the most part, we saw that Kyle Shanahan clearly thinks that he is the guy. He goes from a situation where Jordan Mason was having a good year. He was in, the 70th to 75th percentile, top 20, top 15 running back in the league, certified through his periods of playing. He drops down to, having 4 or 5 snaps, period, a game when Christian McCaffrey comes back. That indicates that to me that Kyle Shanahan thinks that, McCaffrey is the biggest part of their success, bar none, particularly when you have guys in and out of the lineup. But now you're in a position where it seems like he, if not having a significant injury, he is certainly bothered by the Achilles, the calf, whatever has been going on. A lot of internet speculation, zooming into the video and trying to figure out what was going on. All we know is it was a non-contact injury. He seemed to be able to jog off the field, immediately goes into the tent. We don't see him for the rest of the game.
Yeah, well, the team called it a knee injury, right? And the online docs, and by online docs, I don't mean like just random people who are, doing like doctor work by telling us what the injury is, but the people who are doctors like Dr. Chow and some different people who have been in NFL situations and done this and are also online, pretty consistently suggesting it looks like a PCL sprain that happened on the play before he went down, which was a shoestring tackle. And then he got back up. And then on the next play was where we saw it kind of buckle. And so, we'll find out later. But the fact that they ruled him out, I mean, it's possible they ruled him out immediately because they were like, these conditions are crappy. And if you're even remotely banged up, like there's no chance. We're not putting someone who's borderline, that's as valuable as he is, back on the field. We'll find out more. But also, I would argue to a degree, like Jordan Mason rotated in for the first part of the season and the stats were there. He had a ton of success running the ball. And then, he goes out and Isaac Guerrero comes in and has a ton of success running the ball, which all seems to point toward offensive environment. And, not almost anybody. They're clearly smartly finding people that fit their scheme and are good fits for what they're doing offensively, right? Like, you are looking for a zone runner. You're looking for different things in different offenses. And I think that they're smart about how they build their backups there. But I mean, obviously Christian McCaffrey is a priority in the offense. And so he gets the job back regardless of all of these people doing well. But I think that the fact that they were so successful, it doesn't help the running back. It doesn't help the running back argument. The one person that I can point to, actually, since I asked this earlier and I couldn't think of anybody, Derrick Henry is an obvious one with the Tennessee Titans when they were the number 1 seed in the AFC and had like nothing in terms of a passing game, right? Like Derrick Henry absolutely dragged them along that year. That's a strong argument to be made, I think, for an MVP. If you're going to have that conversation, you have to look at an environment where you're like, I don't know that there's that much else going on here. And I just don't know that any of the other running backs are in those specific situations this year. He's been great. None of this is meant to devalue Saquon in any way. I mean, I suppose it effectively does because it just says you can't be in the MVP conversation. But I just, not everybody has to be every specific thing. Like, we can appreciate his talents in the bucket that his talents belong in, which is, the running back within an offense. And as much as you can bring to the table, that's what he's bringing this year.
Exactly. And so we see Saquon put into that successful situation. We talk about Jalen Hurts, maybe being the guy, maybe not being the guy. And coming out of this game, it seems like the 49ers, the Rams get a victory, the Seahawks get a victory, the Cardinals lose. We still don't know where the NFC West is going, but it seems like the 49ers may not be a part of that moving forward, at least if McCaffrey's still going to be hurt, if Bosa's still going to be hurt, so forth and so on. And so my question, Lindsay, is like, where do you start focusing for the offseason for the 49ers, given all of the questions that they have on the table right now? They do have young guys. They do have Nick Bosa. They do have Brandon Ayuk locked up. Jawan Jennings on a team-friendly contract. He's played very well. Mason, Guerrero have looked really good. But you have older players as well. You have George Kittle, Trent Williams. They've been in and out of the lineup. You have McCaffrey, obviously missed almost most of the season at this point and seems to miss more of the season. Purdy, obviously, the extension looming over all of this. How do you approach that?
That's obviously the biggest piece to that puzzle is what they do with Purdy, because how you decide to pay him, they're an interesting team because they have so many guys who are really highly paid. You're looking at like the number of $20+ million assets on a team. Do they have the most in the NFL? They might have the most. They've got a lot of guys that are top of market guys. And so can you only afford to do that if you have the quarterback that's on the deal that Brock Purdy is on right now? And now if you pay Brock Purdy, can you no longer have that many of those guys? Do you have to pull some of those pieces, off the table that are around him? And then how do you replenish those people so that Purdy can still have the success that he's having? Because then you have to really look at Purdy. I mean, he's been very good, but I think the same conversation, how do you pull his play out without taking all of them into account. Like, he's done everything that he's been asked to do well, but he's throwing to good wide receivers. And he's, for the most part, being blocked by a good offensive line. And he has
Exactly.
a very good running back. And he has one of the best tight ends. Like, the pieces are in the defense, for crying out loud, So if you downgrade any of those pieces, then does he have the skill set where he can kind of get you over the top and carry you? And I don't know that I even know that answer. I think a lot of people, in our world probably think that the answer is no, but you're going to have to pay him. Does he go top of market? Like, I'm okay paying him. It's just, how much are you going to pay him? Most quarterbacks are, when they're the next up, you go to the top of the line.
Exactly.
And you get the most money. And we've even seen examples of that in the last couple of years, right? You've got some people who jump to the front of the line that are kind of like Jordan Love, who's making 55 a year just because he was most recently up. You've got Tua coming in at 53. You've got Goff coming in at 53. And Goff has been incredible, but I think that Goff and Tua within their offenses are probably kind of checking some of the same boxes where you're like, well, how much of it is them and how much of it is them being able to do the things that they're asked to do with really good pieces around him and good coaching, et cetera, et cetera. And so how do you continue to build the team that they have there in San Francisco if you pay him in that range? And my guess is that it's going to be even more than that range. Does he have to top Dak? Like, are you going to pay Brock Purdy $60 million?
It's such an interesting question. This is going to be one of the most fascinating negotiations in recent history, particularly given what we've seen from Tua at this point. Similar offensive situation. You have a lot of stars on the offensive side of the ball. You do have a play caller from the Shanahan tree. We've seen him perform well. We haven't seen him be able to get it done. He sits at $53 million. I think that's probably, the team-esque comfortable comp if you're them, but that's just not how the market works, as you highlighted, Lindsay. Like, if I'm an agent, and I believe his agent represents Trevor Lawrence as well, I got Trevor Lawrence top of market money, and he doesn't have any of the accomplishments in terms of analytics, in terms of, team accomplishments, in terms of even like league status to a certain degree that Brock Purdy has. Why shouldn't I be shooting for, $65 million a year in that range with like a lot of guaranteed money coming in? I think this is a place where structure could be really interesting. And like, talking about the hard decisions that will be forced upon the 49ers, it comes down to how much you believe in these older guys. You can play with the cap. You can get really creative. We've seen the Saints do this year over year in a very similar situation where they had, all pros at seemingly and in every position group per se, and they stretch it out and stretch it out. Now they're in a position where they're now 4-8 and struggling to get everything in order. It's a little different, I think, for them because Nicky Bosa is very young. Brandon Ayuk is very young. Like, some of these guys, Jawan Jennings will be on a team-friendly contract, unlikely to be renegotiated at any point in time in the recent future. But like, how much do you trust Trent Williams at this point? How much do you trust George Kittle? How much do you trust that they also worked on Travaris Ward's contract, I believe, as well? Like, how much do you trust these older guys? Christian McCaffrey, who was extended this year. It's such a hard question to answer. And so my question is kind of like, let's just, we're going into the offseason, Lindsay. We know Sam Darnold is coming up as a free agent. He was in a 49ers uniform last year. They have JJ McCarthy behind him. Who knows what's going on in that building? There's all kinds of discussions I know happening behind the scenes, I'm sure, of like, what do we do? We're 9-2 now. But like, let's just say Darnold hits the open market. Like, just in terms of play, not even contract. Let's just consider, would you prefer Sam Darnold at this point, or would you prefer Brock Purdy?
Gosh, I feel like there's still, that's a tough one. I don't know that I'm a Darnold proponent. I don't know that I've seen enough that would make me feel comfortable going away from Purdy. Like, if you're sort of looking at, gosh, I don't know. What do you think?
The
Do you
the
have a strong
biggest
feeling
the
between those
biggest
2?
the biggest wrench that is thrown into this, I think, is the fact that Jimmy Garoppolo was so successful in this offense. And also like the inherent knowledge that they let Darnold go. I mean, they literally had Darnold in the building, did not start Darnold over Purdy. So if I'm the 49ers and then like looking at all the grades and stuff, EPA, I'm probably sticking with Purdy just on the flat face. Now,
Okay.
where it starts getting interesting to me is contract wise, because Sam Darnold is not getting
No.
anywhere near to a money in my opinion.
Nope.
The like maybe if he has 2 or 3 more seasons, golf-esque,
Yeah.
he gets in that territory, but like it would be
Where does he slot
astounding.
in?
It would be astounding. I mean, like he has to slot in almost just off the top of my head, like I don't know, like in the Kyler Murray range, maybe. Like I don't even know.
Still
Like
46.
yeah, like what? But I mean, you're the leader of a 9-2 team. You're one of the best players in terms of efficiency week to week. You're clearly have proven at this point that you can hit all 3 levels of the field, be accurate while also being mobile
Yeah.
in an offense that is like not necessarily an easy offense. Like this is a KOC led offense. We've seen a lot of guys be successful, but we see Kirk Cousins like turn into that type of guy that was someone else was willing to pay that level of money. He's obviously like 27, I think. Like that's a real premium age for that type of passer if you can get him on a long-term deal. So it's like, man, like if I'm the 49ers and just like in the ether, you have that opportunity. I don't think you can go away from Purdy, but it's just like such a difficult decision for the long-term health, knowing that Shanahan is there and like you want to be in title contention every year. Like, are you able to put together a team knowing that you can get 90 to 95% of the production, perhaps, that Purdy also gives you? Like, I'm just not sure that they're in substantially different tiers, I guess is the issue here.
Well, I think that they both are, and this might not be true for Purdy, but we don't know that it's not true for Purdy. I think they're both people that most people would put in a category of quarterbacks who need a good environment in which to succeed, and certainly Darnold. Like you're not
Exactly.
like, so his market is going to be limited in the sense that the like Raiders aren't going to call him up and go, hey, maybe he's the new quarterback of the Raiders. Like I think that teams that are not well constructed and ready to just slide somebody in there, like you need to have a solid offensive line. You need to have your pass catchers in place. You need a lot of different things to be there. I think that's the one takeaway that we know with regards to Sam Darnold. So I'm not if I'm a team that has a lot of holes, I'm not calling up Sam Darnold. I'm not willing to pay him a bunch of money because I think that could be a mistake. I think you need him to go to a team that's pretty good. And so maybe from a negotiating standpoint, the teams can kind of go like, where else are you going to go? Like where else, what other team that is like ours fits that bill where they're going to be willing to pay you what you want? Or are you going to go there? You're going to take some money and you might not look good. Like you have a long history. They're talking to his representative here. Like you've gone to a lot of places and not looked particularly good, right? Like, so is that what you're willing to do? Or are you willing to stay here for less money? I think that there are interesting negotiations that could go with Sam Darnold in particular, right? That drives his price down just because of the history of like sadness of his
Right.
career that he's experienced. Like, I think that he's somebody that would be willing to take less money to stay in a good football situation for himself. Purdy, I think, if you're a team that is in need of a quarterback, are you bidding against the Niners for Purdy? And how much? Like he might be somebody that they might be willing to take away. But are they also looking at him and going, he's a product of the environment? And how does that help us if we don't have that environment?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting also because you just have the franchise tag at your leisure purse. Obviously, it's not super leisureful. There are things that come along with it. Obviously, the price itself and the other restrictions that come along with the franchise tag. But I wonder if both of these situations, the Darnold situation and also the Purdy situation, don't become franchise tag situations, particularly if the Niners really start to, drop like a hot rock. at the end of the season, and he's just not able to pick up the play that he sustained through the beginning of the year. This is kind of becoming a discussion, Lindsay, of like truly team fit. I think there's the guys like the Josh Allens, like the Lamar Jacksons, like the Patrick Mahomes, who thrive regardless of what's going on. And then you have your guys like Jared Goff, like Jalen Hurts, like Sam Darnold, similar to guys like Brock Purdy, where it's just such an unknown at any given point in time. Jimmy Garoppolo as well, like to this point, way back when he was topping the league in EPA, but no one really seemed to believe in him. Of how far can you get at any point in time for your dollar? And it's such a difficult decision, particularly at that quarterback position, when you're trying to get guys like Saquon or Derrick Henry or Christian McCaffrey or, you know, Mike Evans, who we saw have a very good comeback game today with Baker Mayfield in the mix around them. It's just like the cap is a cruel beast at the end of the day.
I'm trying to look for some examples of quarterbacks who are paid maybe more. Like, you know, when you're looking at the pay rankings and you're like, that one's out of place because that guy sucks, you know, like, but and how damaging that is to various teams. I don't know that anyone's popping to me other than Deshaun Watson, but that's just him being on the field. I don't know how it's affected the build so much.
Yeah. I think in a certain view, I think that Derek Carr has probably elevated the floor of the Saints, but I think it's a very similar situation as someone who would be looking to add Sam Darnold would be in that, can I trust this guy with the game on the line, as the Saints had to have viewed many times this season, had to view today, you know, in the red zone with the Rams? Maybe not, but like, will this guy win some games for me, particularly in a good situation? Yeah, for sure.
Well, that's actually an interesting question, because Derek Carr is a guy who pops in all the advanced metrics this year. Like, he is very high in EPA per drop back and completion percentage over expectation and pressure to sack ratio. He's statistically, and not just in terms of like the old school stats, like in the advanced stats, he is good this year. But how do you pull him out of that? Like, how much credit does he get? What does he help tell us a story about those advanced stats and how much we should read into them? Or do you think that those stats tell us Derek Carr's doing his job this year? Because I think what you just said is an interesting point about, like, if you are in a situation where you need a play, is Derek Carr coming through and making that play? Is he the guy that's elevating the team? Or is he a guy who is doing enough that the stats are good, but it's not leading to the results that we ultimately want? Like, how do we make sense of him in the advanced stats? Because we have a long history of Derek Carr. We kind of know who he is as a quarterback.
Right. I think it's almost kind of a small sample size deal this year with Derek Carr. He did miss a lot of games with injury, and we saw Spencer Rattler, you know, not really be able to fill in the shoes. Now, that's a Jake Haener, same deal. Those are young guys that are very unheralded.
Yeah.
It's really tough. I mean, Sam Darnold's the same way. Like, they've won a lot of games, won a lot of very close games, including today. But and he pops in all the same statistics, but do you still trust him? This is like the grand philosophy of football, I guess. It's like, at what point is the guy separating himself from the pack?
Right.
And it's so difficult to answer that without multiple seasons of data. And I think in Derek Carr's case, like, we do have multiple years of data that prove that unless this guy, you know, gets the super soldier serum or something like that, we know kind of what he is at age 30 plus or whatever he is. Darnold, obviously, like, mixed results at this point. We've never seen him in a situation like he is now.
Yeah.
To a certain degree, like, we have seen Derek Carr with Devontae Adams, and we've seen him, you know, win 10 games and stuff like that, and still not, you know, put it all together. Joe Flacco is another guy who was like this year after year after year. And so it's just such a tough view that I think is why you really have to marry the watching of the game and like the understanding of what is going on with the numbers
Yep.
because like Lamar's outstanding EPA per play this year is a product of Lamar when you watch the film. Like,
Yep.
and it even showed to a certain degree today of, Zay Flowers isn't getting it done by himself anytime soon in the way that, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase could get it done. Or like Joe Burrow, fantastic under pressure this year, constantly pressured all year by the Ravens, by the Steelers, by all these other teams, and he's just going to get it done. He's going to get 38 points against one of the best defenses in football, regardless of what you want to do. But, Sam Darnold, when he's going up against the Lions or when he's going up against a better team, may struggle a little bit. And so it's like the parsing out of the key little details, the key little pieces of context over time is kind of, number one, what SumerSports is trying to do. And number two, what colors inside of the lines to a certain degree of the, paint by numbers of what football, I guess, tends to be from the evaluator perspective.
Who, widening out to everybody that played today, who, along the lines of the conversation that we're having, not surprised you, but like played the best or, had a game that we need to note? Who pops to you?
It's tough
in these ways.
The Rams just always stick out to me for whatever reason. Like their defense positively, it just seems so streaky. The thing is like the story over the quote Saints resurgence, the Saints 2-game victory, was that their tackles were like actually good players. Fuaga and Penning like have turned into very good young players. That was like Verse just dominated. Braden Fish dominated the whole game. The key highlight is Bryce Young. Like, I don't know how you can look past this Bryce Young game. I mean, again, everything on point. And this is a very, subpar, at least by the metrics, Buccaneers defense.
Mm-hmm.
But it was in the spots that you wanted to see it. And it was the movement that you wanted to see. And it was the eye candy that you wanted to see. And everything was there. Again, obviously means a little bit less if we're like just going key evaluation against a poor defense, a poor team, but it's in the same spots that it was against the Chiefs, who are a substantially better team that has been proven over years and years and years at this point. And so I just don't know how we can overlook Bryce Young. And it's so funny how different it is from week 4 or week 5, where he was part of our trades discussions, Lindsay. Like,
absolutely. We're
just
done.
Because it seemed like they obviously, like, you have to go by what the teams are telling you, by who they're playing. They were not playing him at the time. And now he looks excellent. And all kudos to Dave Canales on that one. Like, frankly, watching what Baker was doing and watching what Bryce Young was doing at the same time, it was almost like a mirror image of the two guys that were number 1 picks that were slept on for at least a period of time, and then just turned out to be good quarterbacks, it seems like, at this point.
Yeah, Bryce Young, looking at his so his EPA per drop back today was 0.13, which looks like it's his second best number on the season after week 12, his last game. And then his CPOE was 3, which is let's see, he has several positive.
Yeah. And those are both pretty solidly over average performances in terms of anything on record. 60th percentile EPA per play, 62nd percentile CPOE, and that's on a 9.8 ADOT. We also saw a little Adam Thielen get mixed up in there today.
Oh, my gosh.
Kinds of good stuff.
Yes. Yeah. And the was it a touchdown that wasn't called a touchdown? That play, Adam Thielen, which we watched on the replay on Red Zone 30 times.
Yeah.
That was fascinating. But it was fun seeing Adam Thielen back out there. And that was one of the highlights of the day for me, is watching Bryce Young. And it sounds corny and stupid, but watching him have fun playing football, because things have just been so tough for him. And, we all did, as you mentioned, wrote him off when they pulled him off the field. And I wasn't even, we were talking about him and Anthony Richardson around the same time. And I was fine being done with Bryce Young in ways that I was not fine being done with Anthony Richardson, because the specialness of Anthony Richardson, you could still see the physical tools. There's stuff that's untapped. I wasn't sure what it was with Bryce Young. And so somebody who is smaller and doesn't have like, it's not like, oh, but the arm and oh, but the size and oh, but the speed, like that kind of stuff. He didn't have a specific thing that you're latching onto and going, no, we have to continue to try to make this work. And so the fact that he came back and kind of found ways to seemingly make it work. I mean, I would be surprised if there are that many people that are NFL fans that aren't like at least passively happy for him, outside the division maybe, but yeah, you got to be happy for him. I do think he kind of complicates things moving forward though, because a few weeks ago it was clear and obvious, like we're done with him. We're moving on. What's Carolina's plan? And you're coming up with a plan for next year. And now the way he's playing down the stretch, does he complicate that for them? Are they still drafting a quarterback next year? Like, what do you do with your draft pick if you're Carolina? I mean, much will, the next few weeks, every week counts in this conversation. But if it were right now, if we were done with the season right now, what are you doing?
I think going into the year, I thought their plan was going to be, keep Frankie Louvu, keep Jeremy Chin, try to get them back, have a really strong defense, and then, hope for, in particular, Ike Ekwonu to develop, hope for Jonathan Mingo to develop. Obviously, some of those things didn't happen. The defense has been pretty bad. The Jonathan Mingo's then traded, but then you have Coker end up being very good. They
got a draft pick out of that.
Yeah, you have Leggett being very good. You have Jatavian Sanders, who suffered a pretty gruesome injury last week, unfortunately, but he also ended up being very good, like a very good pass catching class.
Yeah.
And then Ekwonu has come along, and Taylor Moton has kind of done the same thing at the other tackle position. Bryce Young comes along mid-season. They're kind of now following this like trend, which I'm saying is like the Dan Campbell book of being a bad team turning into a good team, of like, okay, mid-season, like let's start getting into these weird overtime games, the weird, last second loss to one of the best teams in the league. Everyone's starting to get excited. The quarterback's starting to get along. We know we have 2 tentpole tackles. We know our wide receivers. What was funny is like the wide receivers, everyone's still excited about them, but like we've kind of switched from, these wide receivers may be actually pretty good in Xavier Leggett and Coker, to being like, oh wait, these wide receivers are actually holding Bryce Young back. Like they had a couple of key drops in that game, which is just a funny turn. But there's a lot to be excited about from them. And I think you just start investing in the defense and continuing to invest in the offensive line. I mean, it seems like Chuba Hubbard's their guy. Obviously, like critical fumble there, but he kept them in the game all game. Was very effective in the run game. Yeah.
Yep.
And so I think you just continue to build up a good team the same way the Lions kind of did, and just try
around Bryce though. Around Bryce.
Oh, sir. I think at this point
now we're in.
Yeah. Well, to be fair, I thought that you needed to give him a year 3. Anyway, I was a big Bryce guy, like going back to February. I'm just like, I think this guy's going to end up being a good player, and I don't think you can like move off of that going into year 3 when you still have the 5th year option at your disposal. If you do, not know if he's the best player, but you think he's a starting caliber player. And so like, I think in my view, you let him play out the 3rd year, you make a decision on the 5th year option. If the 3rd year is like, a Baker Mayfield coming back situation as Baker Mayfield played last year, then sure, you probably extend him. Like I really like what I'm seeing from Bryce Young. I don't think you can like panic draft a quarterback at this point. I think you move forward building the team as expected, 2 years ago.
So you've got the 5th pick in the draft right now. Am I right about that?
Right. I think they have three or 4 wins. Right. So yeah, you'd be pretty high up there.
So what do you prioritize with that 5th pick? How are you building around him in like they have a lot of draft assets, to be fair. So there are a bunch of different things, and it could depend on, where the depth is.
Right. So, I mean, like thinking about the most important positions, I think they're okay at tackle. Like I think that I don't think they need to go with like a Will Campbell at this point. You do have Derek Brown under contract extended, who is one of the better defensive tackles in the league. Suffered a crucial injury preseason, won't play at all this year. And so like Mason Graham probably isn't in the play there. You look at the edge rushing position, they have kind of some stopgaps there. They got rid of Brian Burns, they have Jadeveon Clowney now. That's a position of need, certainly. Like Travis Hunter would make perfect sense for this team. They need a cornerback. And then also adding another offensive firepower piece, like gadget type guy, makes sense for this team, given they do have seeming depth, the wide receiver position now. If not a star level player, which you hope Travis Hunter can be at the wide receiver position, you slot him in as a stalwart cornerback, J.C. Horn on the other side. I think that makes a lot of sense. And then I think perhaps, and Will Johnson could be another view, the Michigan prospect as well, cornerback. Like maybe that's the way they want to go, a little bit more traditional. But I do think I think defense has to be the way, particularly the secondary has to be the way they go. And I think trading back probably is in their best sense, I think, to a certain degree.
Can I ask you, going back to tonight's game, one of the thoughts that I had, and we've sort of established that you don't have a lot of experience in cold weather either to this degree. There were some things that struck me that I thought were kind of funny that I realized that I did not know. Like at the beginning of the game, there were the shots of the shovelers that were famously paid, to come in, $20 an hour, or whatever it is that they pay them. And they're shoveling the aisle and they're throwing the snow in the seats. So it was like the goal was just to get the aisles clear. And then later in the game, they were showing shots of the fans kind of making their way in. And it looked like they were in charge of getting the snow off of their actual seat. Like, okay, so we're just getting the aisles clear for safety. You figure out your own seat. And I thought that this was a fascinating thing. Like they're not getting the snow off the seats. People are just coming in and like plopping down, like every man for himself. Like, how does this work? I thought the whole thing was fascinating. And I realized that I really had no experience with this environment. And I think it's kind of crazy that you're just like, here you go.
This is becoming a true warm weather podcast because I was shocked by this when I moved to the Midwest.
People are like, you guys are idiots. This is my whole life.
Some of the best podcasts are just like people finding out stuff together. And today, me and Lindsay are finding out how people deal with snow. Because like when I moved to the Midwest, I was so shocked that when they plow the parking lots, that they just leave it in like a giant mountain and it would just stay there until March. And I was like, this is just a giant snow mountain that's there
out of the way
in the grocery store parking lot until March. And I feel like this is very similar. Like people are doing Macho Man Randy Savage, like elbows in the snow. Obviously you don't want anyone to fall down the bleachers when they're walking on the aisle. But by the way, Tage Seth was at this game. So maybe we'll have to, he was at the game. So we'll have to get
how much snow was on your seat when you arrived? And how do you dispense of the snow? Do you have to sit in it? Are your pants wet for the entire game? Like how does this work? These are questions that I have. And then the other question that came up with relation to this was about how many NFL fields, the actual field is heated underneath, because obviously there are some, not all of them are. I found out today, but I was unable to find a resource that felt trustworthy enough to actually limit this. There was an article that was written a few years ago that said there were 5 teams that had heated fields. And I was all ready to come on with this fun fact and like do like a, can you guess what they are? But then I went and Googled specific stadiums. And as it turned out, they too have heated fields, but they weren't included in the article. And so now I'm like, how many? One of them was Allegiant Field. And I was like, why does Allegiant Field need a heating system under the field? It's covered and in Vegas. And so what are we doing there? But anyway, can you guess any of the ones that like you think for sure are the ones that fit this bill?
Well, so I'm sure Lambeau is the first, right?
They were the first, literally, to install a heating system under the field.
Right. I kind of knew that, but for whatever reason, just like stupid football trivia. But I'm assuming Cleveland feels like one, but I know that stadium's really old.
So they might be, but they're not one of the ones that showed up in this article that I can confirm for sure.
Yeah,
there's
I think
5 that I can confirm, and then one more that we haven't mentioned, that like a website about the actual, people that put together the stadium said that they have heated whatever. And that's the
So
Ravens. I'll take that. That was the Ravens. It said something about M&T Bank Stadium having
yeah,
some
the
sort of heating,
Ravens.
but they weren't included.
Talking about tiers of quarterbacks, I think there's like tiers of northern stadiums, which is like
Right?
Lambeau is the most geared towards football in the cold. And
Yeah.
then there's like there's Paul Brown Stadium, which I guess is they changed the name obviously, but it's the Bengals Stadium. And Cleveland is like, it's a real toss up if these guys have heating. It's a real toss up if these guys have like stands or like places to sit to a certain degree. And then there's like Buffalo, which I kind of goes in there, but I think Buffalo likes the snow a little bit more. And then there's like the Patriots and the Steelers, which are like, it's a strategic decision if they do or do not have heating.
So the Steelers do have heating. I know that. The Patriots were another one, I forget, like the Ravens that popped up separately, but they weren't included in any lists. So I don't know. I'm going to have to get to the bottom of this. The other ones are the Eagles, we said the Steelers, the Chiefs, and the Broncos.
Oh yeah, the Midwestern, like true Midwestern teams, I guess. I always forget how cold it is out there. Like the Arrowhead game against Miami was like terrible last year.
I don't even know how you get to the bottom of finding that list in a way that is trustworthy. Like, am I gonna have to call the NFL office and be like, "Hey,
Yeah.
for a podcast, I just need you to answer this question so that I can be accurate." They're like, "Get out of here."
Freedom of information. I don't know if the NFL has to abide by that.
Who has heat onto the field? I
right.
need to
Well,
know.
the people must know. And so as we close out this podcast, Lindsay, people must know any other favorite, moments from this football weekend.
Oh, we already mentioned gosh, you go first. You go first. I need time to think.
I love Bryce Young. I love
Bryce Young.
The Eagles are just like they're under your skin successful at this point. But I that's a key win. I loved seeing Jaden Daniels, like back to Jaden Daniels form. I realized it was the Titans who are struggling a little bit, but they really put on a show. Those were probably like the three most notable performances in my view.
Terry was on the right side several times. I enjoyed that. It's my obsession and it won't go away. Yeah, there was one of the things that I think is interesting is I went on a really weird, I was sort of obsessed with ADOTs today. And Anthony Richardson has the 3 highest single game ADOTs of the season. And I, mentioned that on Blue Sky, and somebody said, so like, what does that say? And I was like, that's an interesting, I feel like it helps tell a story, but I don't think it says any one specific thing, right? Like it doesn't necessarily tell us that he's relying on the downfield pass too much. More than anything, it tells me that they're just finding themselves maybe behind the sticks more frequently and having to chase it. I don't know. Do you think, because I think it's interesting, he has literally the 3 highest, and today was the 2nd highest of the season. His ADOT was, 16 plus.
Yeah.
It's been that 3 times.
It's an interesting question because I think Flacco's was pretty high as well. And I wonder if this is not just a Shane Steichen MO thing, that they want him to take these kind of first read shot plays, given that is the skill of Anthony Richardson. He has a huge arm. He typically has been able to identify what a good play is versus what a bad play is in terms of, SumerSports' decision-making metric. It's more about the accuracy with him more generally. So I'm wondering if it's not a scheme thing, maybe something good to ask Sean Syed and Stats Scheme podcast. But also, that was another one of my favorite performances. It's so funny with Richardson, especially kind of as we reach midseason, because he's starting to string together these good winning performances. Sometimes the numbers aren't always there. And I thought today, outside of the pick, was a winning performance from him, but it doesn't look all that great. But that was another one of my favorite moments from the week as well.
One of my favorite moments, honestly, and this is not necessarily, it's a weird favorite moment to have, but I like being right. When Arizona kicked the field goal to go up 6.
Right.
And it just felt immediately like Minnesota has to win this game because Arizona has faultily opened the door for Minnesota to win this game. So the fact that Minnesota then was able to follow through on that, just felt like I love it when a plan comes together. Like, I
Right.
feel like people need to learn this lesson the hard way, apparently.
Right.
And I also very much enjoyed that Greg Olson was calling that game, because he has turned out to be my favorite game announcer out of all of them.
Agreed.
I love the fact that he calls the game. He doesn't get super nerdy and in the weeds, whatever, but he understands the analytics. He understands the explanations behind all of the things that feel kind of new. And he doesn't condescendingly talk about them. He doesn't say things like the analytics say, which is my pet peeve, because to me that's like, it's like, it just feels like somebody who is unwilling to fully understand it.
Right.
By saying like, those people over there, it almost feels like tonally they're saying the nerds say that you should do this. And it's just like probability attached to
Exactly.
a lot of evidence and giving you the best chance to win. Like, why are we looking down our nose at that? You don't have to follow it all the time, but you should. I feel strongly that everyone who's calling a game in 2024 has a responsibility to understand these dynamics that we're talking about. And it's not that hard to try to learn why teams are doing these things and to not talk about them in a way that feels like you're looking down your nose at it. I mean, you don't have to you don't have to agree with all of the different decisions that are happening, but you do need to kind of understand the environment in which coaches and front offices and people are taking in new information. And so that you can explain what's happening and the decisions that they're making in a responsible manner. And I think that Greg Olson, more than any other analyst that is out there, has proven that he is up to that task. And so that was one of my favorite moments of the day today.
Precisely. I think he does an absolutely fantastic job. And he also brings the player side of it too. And it's a good marriage on television. And you know what, Lindsay, I think you do a fantastic job. And I think that was a great explanation of why we do what we do over here at Sumer Sports. So folks, that is our show for today. That is Lindsay Rhodes from the SumerSports Show. Be sure to subscribe to that show. It comes to you every Tuesday with a ton of great information from both Lindsay and from Thomas Dimitroff, the president here at SumerSports as well. Signing off from SumerSports, she's Lindsay Rhodes. I'm Sam Brookhouse. Have a good evening.
Bye, guys.